All right, welcome back, everyone. What does it mean to be a storyteller? How do you evolve the work? And how do you deepen it? These are questions that sound like they maybe belong in a writing workshop, but they belong exactly in this room because at the heart of games is also storytelling. Before I introduce the next speaker, I want to tell you about Expedition 3.3, which 3x3, that takes 3 elements of what it means to be a creative and the 3 skills that underlie them. And did you know that Expedition 3.3 has set a historic world record? How many of you want to guess how much awards it's won across all ceremonies globally? Someone want to guess? How many awards has Expedition 3.3 won? Yeah? 100? More? A little bit more. I'll put you out of your misery. Expedition 3x3 has won over 436 awards across all ceremonies globally. I think that deserves a big round of applause. And keep it going for the speaker, Jennifer Svedberg-Yen, who is the lead writer and voice and localization producer.
Hello, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Svedberg-Yen. I am the lead writer and voice and localization producer on Expedition 33, and it's a real honor to be here to talk to you a little bit about creative frameworks. So thank you, Nordic Games, for inviting me. Ooh, we are going to do some quick swap-aroos. I've noticed that a lot of these professional presentations, they all need a punny title, or like a clickbaity title, but a punny title. And so I decided to call mine Expedition 3x3. Ooh. Tack så mycket. So yes, I decided to call mine Expedition 3x3x3. You guys get a bonus 3 here at Nordic Game. So that's 3 core elements of being a creative and 3 key skills to support that. And bonus for this session is 3 foundational documents for building your narrative. And this is a very simple framework, and there are obviously many, many different ways to create frameworks and think about these things and organize these types of thoughts, but I find this useful as just a starting point. So, what does it mean to be a creative? I think of it as taste, execution, and having something to say. These are obviously non-linear, right? They're very subjective. It's not like a sliding scale of good to bad. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to talk about it in terms of being able to mature and deepen each of these elements. So first, taste. Taste to me is your North Star, right? Kind of like your vision, the quality of work that you want to achieve, the destination. And execution, your execution skills, that determines how close you actually get to that vision. So this is your craftsmanship, right? And I'd say one of the hardest things about learning as an adult is our own inner critic. We're all very harsh on ourselves, particularly creatives, because often our taste evolves faster than our execution. So when we're kids, our taste and our execution kind of evolve together, right, in lockstep. So you're not thinking as much about that gap. It's just enough to keep you going. But as an adult, usually our taste goes much faster, expands and deepens much faster than our execution skills. And so it can be very demoralizing when you see kind of in your mind what you want to achieve, but then you see the big gap between what you have and where you want to go. And so as an adult, we need to remind ourselves that this is a journey everyone takes. I don't know a single creative out there who's able to just immediately nail their execution. And it's a journey, it's a process. And you gotta suck first before you can actually get good, right? That's part of the process. So the VC world likes to say, fail better, fail faster, right? And I do actually like that because failure is not something to be ashamed of. It's information. It's how we get better. It's how we improve. And it's a necessary part of the process. It's a necessary part of every game dev cycle, right? I'm sure you guys all can probably relate. And so another analogy I like to use is pancakes. I think everybody here has probably made or at least eaten pancakes, right? The first pancake is usually the sacrificial pancake because it's very misshapen. You know, the pan's not hot enough. It's kind of lumpy, misshapen, undercooked. But you can't get to the nice pancakes without going through that first sacrificial pancake. So that's, again, part of the process. And we kind of need to be kind to ourselves. So embrace your first pancake. That's what I like to say. Yeah. Personally, I call my first drafts the vomit draft because it's really, you're just trying to get something down and get it going. It's not pretty, right? But I think pancakes are a little bit more palatable than vomit. So that's why I tell people pancake. Yeah. So in some instances, people's execution can actually exceed their taste. And it's actually, there's a subreddit for this. There's a subreddit for everything. But there's a subreddit called ATBGE, which is awful taste but great execution. And it's also known as DIY. So check that out if you have some time. It's special. Yeah, so those are the three core elements of taste. That's the taste and execution. But the third is having something to say. And the stories that I personally am most drawn to are the ones that really make you think and feel. So they have a personality, they have a point of view. And I contrast these with stories which are primarily a sequence of cool events, with some characters along for the ride. I enjoy those too. Don't get me wrong, those are also really fun, but it's a different category with a different purpose. So if we're talking about stories that have soul to them, that have something meaningful to say, that really comes from the creative team, right? It really comes from what their point of view is, what perspectives they have, how they see the world, right? Whether it's art, music, or story. And that's something that's uniquely yours as a creative. People can copy your style, your taste. People can kind of emulate your execution. And by people, I mean AI these days. But the one thing they cannot do is replicate what you have to say, because that is a function of your own individual life experiences, your own personal point of view, how you think about the world, how you see the world, how you relate to it, and how you express it. That's something that nobody else in the universe has those exact same experiences and has those exact same viewpoints. So that's something nobody can take from you. And that's something that I think makes a story great, is seeing that, seeing what the authors, the creators, the artists have to say. And so, yeah, so those are the three elements of being a creative. The interesting thing, though, is that not all creatives are hired for all three things. So as an individual creative, you obviously want to try to continue to work on all three elements and deepen those. But what's interesting is that, for instance, in game dev, not all roles require all three. So it's important, whether you're a studio, a narrative lead, or a creative, to make sure there's a good match, right? Some roles are really only looking for your execution, and you are working with somebody else's taste and what they have to say. And hopefully you can also provide things as well along those ways, but it's really guided by somebody else. For other roles, they really just want your taste or something to say, but you're not actually the one doing the execution, right? And then that's another set of unique challenges. How do you communicate your vision to the people who are implementing it? And if you're really lucky, but also this will be a lot of work, is you get to do all three. But that's a lot of work. So yeah. And ideally, as a team lead, I think you'll want to assemble a team with complementary tastes and complementary skills, execution skills, and also complementary things that they want to say. Me personally, I love when everybody on the team can contribute their own points of view. And you then are able to elevate each other's work. right? And it's not just one. It's like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? But it's important that they're complementary, that they work together rather than pull apart in opposite directions. So that's something that I think is very important when you are assembling your team, assembling your Avengers. And friction can occur when people have differing tastes. So I think it is very important when you are trying to create something collectively and collaboratively. Yeah, the next part is a bit more specific to storytelling, but I think it actually applies to quite a lot of other mediums. I'm a firm believer in lifelong learning, and I'm also kind of a type A perfectionist, so probably a lot of people here are. So my question is always, how do we get better? How do we improve our taste, our execution, and what we have to say? And there are multiple elements to this, but the key one that I like to emphasize is that the richer your life is outside of writing, the richer your writing will be. Obviously, there's a nice work-life balance to that, which we love in Sweden. But beyond that, everything in your life, every experience you have, everything you notice or take away from the world, that is fertile soil in which to plant your ideas. And you can make your stories, your character, your world so much richer and more immersive and real because they're pulling from something that's real. So you can have a really fantastical situation, you can have a fantastical backdrop, you can have really cool, awesome like things, but you can also bring it back to what's human, and that comes from your personal life experience. Yeah. So the 3 skills that I think are helpful in helping us improve is curiosity, empathy, and logic. And these aren't just feel-good buzzwords. My personal opinion is that good storytelling requires all 3. So, curiosity. It's really important to cultivate your curiosity. You know, it's about asking questions, peeling the onion, exploring, and also just trying new things, always learning, always asking why. Why? Why this? Why not that? How? You know, asking all the questions. It means looking at the world with a very active eye and engaging with it. And curiosity is what drives us forward into the world, and it deepens our understanding. So everything around us then becomes a potential element or inspiration for a story. Fun anecdote, like some of the story elements in Expedition came because I was exploring hydroponics and growing tomatoes in my bathroom. So that's why some of the characters work on an aqua farm. And the reason why SK has a pet rock is because I had like a random spider growing in one of my plants that I decided to name Maury. And I thought, oh, Maury could be short for Maurice, and then that would be a fun name. And then I'm like, oh, but what's an even more French name than that, Francois? And then we're like, that's where all of that came from, right? Or there's quite a few things inspired by my dog as well. So I'll get into that some other time. The next part is empathy. Empathy is applying that curiosity to the people around us and also to ourselves, right? It's understanding, why do people do the things that they do, or believe what they believe, or see the world the way they do? What's their internal motivation and logic? And I like to say that we are all the main character in our lives, right? We're all the heroes of our own story. But I'm pretty sure every single one of us here has been the villain in somebody else's story. And so we need to think about, how does that work? Can we hold all of that in our heads at the same time? And to write a 3-dimensional character, even if they're the bad guy doing shitty things, like, I will always write it from their perspective as their advocate. Right? I will always take their side when I'm writing their piece, because to them, what they're doing makes sense, right? Even if it doesn't make sense to the other party members or the other characters, even if it doesn't make sense externally to them, it has to have a logical underpinning, right? And I'm not really a puppet master here, trying to make the characters do what they want to do. I'm actually role-playing every single character. So I actually like to say that writing is the ultimate RPG, because you actually have to role-play every single person authentically and be their advocate. Yes. And obviously, the tone will change depending on the genre, but the portrayal should always be of substance and have consistency. And that brings us to logic. I think logic is actually an underrated aspect of storytelling. And I think that, obviously with fiction, there's suspension of disbelief, but that's not a blank check, right? That is an agreement, a handshake agreement with the player, with the audience. So there are parameters to this. There has to be an internal logic there. And one of my pet peeves, I have a lot of pet peeves, but one of my pet peeves are characters who sort of stop existing when they're not in the scene. And then they're just idling somewhere. They're not advancing their motivations or their goals. They're just off screen. And then they come back and it's like nothing happened in that time in between for them. That's not how real life works, right? So even if a character is off screen, they're still going to be trying to achieve their goal. So what's interesting is, what are they doing when they're off screen? That's interesting information. That's interesting things you can then weave back in and react to in your actual main story. And another pet peeve are characters who do things because the plot needs them to do it, not because they actually want to do it. Not because it's organic, right? Or they are dropping a lot of exposition and saying a lot of things which they wouldn't actually do if there was a real situation. They wouldn't feel the need to explain this or talk about this. So all of that comes back to logic. And the more you can adhere to internal logic, the tighter the story is, and the more immersive it feels. And I really like to reference the South Park guys here, because they said it really well. A story is not this happens, then this happens, then this happens, right? That's really boring. That's not really a story. It's usually this happens, therefore this happens, but then this happens. Right? So you have an actual chain of cause and effect. And that becomes interesting because now you can see how each thing impacts the next thing. And when I'm approaching story writing, I do this as well. We start with the premise and the hook, and it becomes an intellectual exercise, almost a thought experiment. If this is true, how do the other people in this universe react? What do they do? How do they react to the external stimuli? How do they react to each other? So you apply this at the plot level, but you also apply it to the character level. How does the character change because the world has changed? How does the world change? How does a character change when you put them with another character? How do they influence each other, right? Another pet peeve is when characters are talking at each other, but not with each other, right? Generally, when you're having a conversation, you're reacting to each other and you're changing each other in some way, right? There's some impact there. So what is that impact in that scene? So, cause and effect. So apply these 3 skills, and I always say use all of them. Use what's in your life in your writing. And most of all, have empathy and kindness to yourself, because we can always be our own harshest critic. So, the bonus 3 foundational documents. This is specifically for narrative. And for me, the 3 foundational documents are narrative summary, the lore and timeline, and in-depth character biographies. Obviously, there are lots of different ways to do this. This is just the way that I like to approach it. So I am not saying that you must do this or this is the only way, so just caveating this. I'm just sharing how I think about these things. Because what I've realized after talking to a lot of other people and working with some different studios is that people have different definitions in their minds of what these things mean. So on the surface, it seems like, well, yeah, duh, obviously. But actually, everybody does it slightly differently. So, narrative summary. For me, this is something you should have at the very, very, very beginning of the dev process. And it's a living document. It's something that will continuously evolve throughout development. And I like to say plans are useless, but planning is essential. So it's very important to have this, but also realize that nothing is set in stone. It's going to continuously change. It has to change. The second is audience. Who's going to use this? I like to use this document for pretty much most people, like onboarding new hires so they can quickly understand what the overall story is, right? Actors, directors, marketing partners, localization linguists, and QA teams. It's very helpful for them to get a big picture overview of what everything is, get the tone, get the narrative right away. Also, it's very important that it's graphical, that you include concept art, in-game art, and you try to make it as digestible as possible, because one thing I've learned is nobody likes to read. So other than the writers, nobody else on the team really likes reading. So what is it? For me, it's a summary of your hook, which is your premise, your inciting incident, etc. The world, your lore, your key history points, characters, themes, and a walkthrough, which is a very simple 1 to 2 page max of the entire game, from start to finish, including the ending. I find that a lot of folks don't include the ending, or they leave it very vague. Like it's very clear what they have at the beginning, but it starts to become very, very vague, and we'll figure something else out at the end. I think it's very important to know your ending at the start. And it will evolve, it will change, it might not always stay the same, but you need to know where you're going, all right? What it is not, and these are some examples from real studios, it's not a teaser, it's not a concept summary, it's not a pitch deck, it's not a setup with no payoffs, like it's not like I'll tell you act 1, but we'll figure out act 3 later. It's not an 80-slide storyboard. It's not 5 overlapping documents all bundled together, which often have inconsistencies between them. And it's not Miro boards, right? It's usually probably like a 20 to 30 page deck or max, which has all the key things you need to know to understand the narrative identity and the narrative journey that you're going on. Second is lore and timeline. So I approach timelines slightly differently. For me, it's important to think back to the preceding events, go back to history. So for instance, for Expedition 33, our lore timeline went back to before the fracture, before the Painterest first emerged, right? And what happened that led to the events today. We are all the products of the things that came before us. And to understand why we are the way we are, why the world is the way it is, you need to understand history. And you need to understand it from the point of view of every single character, faction, or group, or civilization, or the world. Right? So I like to create kind of like a timeline, and we have the characters down the side, antagonists, factions, worlds, etc., whatever you might have, right? And then what are all of them doing across this timeline? And you'll be able to identify if you have plot holes. If somebody's not doing anything or advancing their agenda for 50 years in the middle, or 5 years, or however your timeline is, then you need to ask yourself, what are they doing during that time? And usually, if you ask yourself that, you'll find something interesting you can use to make the story even more compelling, right? So what are they doing? When do their timelines intersect? When do people interact with each other, and what happens in that interaction, right? How are they working towards their objectives? And yeah, plot holes. You can also see when sometimes the timelines don't work, you know? You're like, oh, well, they'll just end up in this part of the geography here, but you're like, actually, if you build in travel time, they wouldn't be able to make it there. Or how do they immediately go from here to there? So you can figure out some of these inconsistencies. Then the next part is character bios. So again, million ways to do this. For me, it is specific events and relationships that explain why this person is who they are. Why do they think this way? Why do they want what they want? Why do they act and react the way they do? Because once I know what makes them tick, what's their trauma, right? And what were the influential moments that changed the way they see the world, then I will know how to write them. Right? Then I'll know how they will react in a situation. Because once you know how they think, you'll know what they'll say, and you'll know what they'll do. Here are things that I see from a lot of other studios. They're useful, but it's not sufficient. So when I say character biography, it's not this. It can include things from this, but each of these things in and of themselves are not sufficient. They're necessary or useful, but they're not sufficient on their own. So personality matrices, lists of character traits, it's nice to describe them, but that's a snapshot in time of, oh, this is what their personality is like. What's more interesting is, why is their personality this way, right? They're grumpy. Why? Like they hate XYZ. Why? They love, like they are joyful because of blah, blah, blah. Why? Right? Favorite color, snack, weapon, motto, extended life story, a list of their hopes and fears, theoretical narrative functions, what are they a metaphor or symbol of? These are all helpful, but they are not sufficient to write from. And so, yeah, so those are 3 of the foundational documents that I find useful for me personally. But again, million different ways to do this, and what works for me might not work for everybody else, but just sharing how I think about things. And a quick summary of what we said before, like you want to cultivate your non-writing life. You want to practice curiosity, empathy, and logic, and use this to develop your taste, execution, and point of view, like what you specifically want to say. And I just want to say that it's not that we have a message. There's no like, this is the message of the game, right? That's not what I mean. And with Expedition, we don't do that either. We don't say like, this is your takeaway, this is what's right, this is what's correct, this is the message. We offer up questions and we ask people to come to their own conclusions and decide for themselves. But there is a very specific philosophical perspective behind it, even without saying this is the message and takeaway, right? And lastly, be kind to yourself and don't stop. So thank you very much. I think we can open it up for questions.
Thank you so very much. I will also share with you that this is one of the most attended talks at the conference. So take that in as well.
That's awesome.
We have about 6 minutes for questions. So the floor right here, first and foremost, and then we'll go to the lovely lady over there.
I like your shirt for those who come after. Yes, of course. Oh, yeah. I'm starting a little like initiative to like talk about writing with people. So yes, absolutely. Message me on Instagram and we'll add you to the list. Yeah.
Oh, question: is it only based in Stockholm or Sweden? Where's this Pancake Club?
It's virtual. Okay. When I go to events, I try my best to do a little in-person meetup with a small group, and we can just discuss writing. But it's also virtual, and I'll be hosting some virtual sessions and maybe start a Discord for, I don't know, we're still figuring it out, but it's mainly to allow people who want to start writing to encourage each other, share resources, and get feedback.
Nice, thank you so much. The question over there. Would you mind just holding on until a volunteer comes with the mic so the crowd can hear you? There you go.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Awesome talk. Thank you for coming. So I'm also a writer, and I feel very strongly with everything you said. I'm like, yes. Especially with making the story mean something, like what is the goal of, what are the takeaways from this? And I usually, if it's a linear story, right, it's like the ending is the big part. And I always find it so hard to be like, what is the purpose? How do I find the meaning of the work that I'm writing? Do you have any thoughts of how do you find your inspiration for the meaning?
I think... Great question. It's hard to answer though, because I think it depends on the story and where you are in your life. Normally, I look towards the setup that we have, and then I look towards real life. And so, for instance, with the whole gommage situation, one of the analogs for that, we have multiple, but one is COVID. So, what I was really wrestling with during COVID was the idea of how do we balance the duty that we owe to ourselves versus the duty we owe to others? How do we balance respecting someone's autonomy and their life choices and preventing them from hurting themselves or others, right? You kind of have to, like, where do you draw the line? And again, I don't know the answer to that. That's why we offer it up to people, and you have to choose Maya Oliver, so you decide. But that's where I drew inspiration from, was just looking at real life and some of the things that I wrestle with deeply on a philosophical level and emotionally, because I'm sure all of us were pretty emotionally affected by COVID, and you're just kind of like, what is the right thing to do? I want to do the right thing. What is right? So
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Another question over there behind the camera, and then in front of the other camera. So the guy with the Adidas t-shirt. Yes.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. My question was around, I looked into, the whole development of Expedition 33, and I think it was around 2021 where you basically reboot the whole game.
Yes.
How much of the original concept, character, story did you actually keep and carry into the new game? Or was it a full reboot?
Full reboot from the beginning. So the original game was a Victorian steampunk game. And so the things we did carry over, though, were the names of the characters. So Maël, Lune, and Verso are from that. The characters are very different, though. but the names we kept because they're nice names. And the other thing we kept was this started as a joke, we were going to kill the main character in the end of Act 1 in that one. That was just me joking around, and we're like, actually, maybe we should. And then so we kept that concept through. But beyond that, from a narrative perspective, did not really carry through that much. But we carried through a lot of the gameplay, though. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a lovely lady over there. Yes, in the black. Thank you so much. And if there's one more question, please raise your hand. I'll go to this lady here in the front.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the talk. I don't work anywhere near narrative, so it was really nice to get some insight into that and also see how much overlap there is with other crafts. So my question is around, I've often heard that diverse teams and teams that can challenge each other lead to the best ideas and the most creative outcomes.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you were saying, you need to find people that kind of are complementary to each other and to the ideas. So I'm wondering, what do you look for when you are building teams? And how do you know you've succeeded in striking the right balance?
Great question, and hard to answer in practice. Yes, so it's a balance, right? You want to find complementary but not identical perspectives. If it's identical, you're just in an echo chamber, and then you just sort of, it could be cool, but I always feel that the whole should be greater than the sum of the parts, right? So I do think it's necessary to have different perspectives. So one more lighthearted example is humor in the game. So we had my sense of humor, which was more like the wee-woo Esquier type, Monoko, you look like a mop. Let me give you a haircut. Oh, let me polish my Nevron legs, and that's my humor. Then we have Guillaume's sense of humor, which is sort of like the magic verso. Let me cut myself in half and then just waddle around, and it's just the bottom half of my body, right? And we also had another team member, Victor Delard, who worked on all of our gestural dialogue and Nevron side quests, and he put in a lot of really funny gestural memes, like the "this is fine" meme, the breakdancing gestural, all of those things. So that's an instance where I feel like we all have very different senses of humor, right? But we found ways to make them work together, and they all kind of bring a different dimension to it. So that's one example, I think, of where we're not all exactly the same, but we can bring something cool and a different perspective. Similarly for narrative in terms of how we think about very deeply philosophical issues, right? We might have different viewpoints. But where you don't necessarily want are where it's very opposite. So for instance, I was helping a team, a different team, but the types of dialogue that they wanted were very much more traditional, slightly cliched. Which don't get me wrong, cliche has its purpose. So it's not a ding on them, but I think they wanted very simple, more traditional RPG type dialogue, and so a lot of times we would have a lot of discussion over is this too cryptic? Whereas I like to write things with subtext and things I don't like to over-explain, and where for them they needed more explicit. So that's something where I feel like fundamentally there's a different philosophy on how you want to do narrative. That's something where I feel like that in retrospect was not a good fit. So yeah, sorry, it's hard to answer because again, it really you don't know until you try, right? Yeah.
We are unfortunately over time, but
I'm so sorry.
If you can be very brief, we can still take your question.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No worries, no worries.
Super brief then.
Yeah.
Mael's ending or Versus ending, and why?
Everyone asks me this. Both, because they're meant to be interpreted together. They're two sides of the same coin, and they are both bittersweet, and they both have beautiful things and terrible, sad things. And the question you have to ask is, whose happiness are you prioritizing? Who is paying the price? And can you live with yourself asking those people to pay the price for somebody else's happiness? And so it's like asking to choose your favorite child or something. For me, like the two endings, inherently, we always knew there would be two. We wrote them together as a package. So it's meant to be a duality there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think, unfortunately, we are kind of time, but you can get Jennifer outside in the lobby as well if you have another question. I think we all just had some session of collective therapy together, yeah? Yeah? But thank you so much, Jennifer. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Thank you.